Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. Today we're meeting in work session, and we have 6 of our members present and another one due to arrive. Our student member is also present. So we do have a quorum. However, we are not conducting formal business at a work session. This is an opportunity for us to receive information, to ask questions, and to discuss. And before we begin, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. David Savine, our superintendent.
Thank you, President Williams. Members of the board, I'm pleased to share with you that we're off to an exceptional start to the school year. But as is tradition in Washington County, the first meeting prior to the first day, we like to highlight the first day of school through the voices of our students and staff.
It is amazing to have everyone back. I've missed seeing them over the summer. The excitement with the kids coming into the building, the excitement with the adults, it's just the best feeling.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
The most exciting thing for me this year was seeing all the familiar faces and meeting our new families.
The most exciting thing of being back is getting to learn again.
I'm probably most excited this year for staff to connect with families and community members to continue to build those relationships.
I'm excited for cooking with Miss Wendy. I like to build things with Mr. Whitaker. And I'm so excited for playing kickball with my friends.
I do my homework and my Pac-Man!
I am most excited for our students to be successful, not only in the classroom, but in all of the ways that they can be in clubs and organizations to have the best high school experience possible.
I'm most excited for my senior year of softball and graduation at the end of the year.
The best part of coming back to school was getting to know my teachers.
I'm excited for school to learn more challenging math.
The most exciting part about having the students back in the building is seeing their smiling faces and their excitement to meet their teachers and to see all their friends coming back for a new school year.
Welcome back, WCPS. It's going to be a great school year. Yeah! It's nice to have our students back. I want to take just a moment to extend our appreciation to our communications team for pulling that video together and highlighting the good work of our team members and, most importantly, capturing the voices of our students. President Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. Okay, colleagues, we have 2 topics for today, and the first one is a discussion of fiscal year 2026 budget priorities. So, Dr. Savine, turn things back to you to introduce those who will be presenting, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Thanks again, President Williams, members of the board. It is that time of year where we also revisit our budget priorities, but before I turn it over to Mr. Prue and Mr. Sisler and our team members from finance, I just want to ground the board's work on where we were this time last year. We knew going in FY25 budget was going to be the most challenging budget cycle. I knew that nearly 2 years ago when I came in. It was highlighted that there would be some challenges in FY25, in particular ESSER funds moving away, as well as a number of blueprint positions that needed to come into the general fund. This board for 2 years now has created priorities that has guided the superintendent and staff in terms of proposing initially the draft budget that eventually becomes yours. You'll see this work is guided by your priorities, and also with our new strategic plan being adopted, you'll see an effort to merge, and it will be our recommendation that those 4 priorities of our strategic plan become the priorities of the board. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Prue, Mr. Sissel.
Thank you, Dr. Svine, and good afternoon, board members. Again, as Dr. Svine mentioned, we met basically a year ago, this work session in September last year, to review the work of the prior year and to look at priorities for FY25. The Board of Ed, you then voted at the business meeting in September to reaffirm the priorities from the prior year, but you did juggle the order a little bit, but it was basically the same priorities from the prior year. Before we get into how we really look at how the new initiatives and how the funding you had came forward and which priorities it landed, we wanted to take a quick minute also to just take a look back at the items that were eliminated from the superintendent's draft budget to your final approved budget in June. That 5-month period really where things were fast and furious. We had changes in the funding model, we had changes in legislation, a number of things that impacted how we were planning forward to the budget. And so on the screen is a list of items that were reduced from the superintendent's original draft budget. So we cut $7 million before we were finally able to balance last year's budget. As you can see at the top, we had staff members that were going to transition from 10 and 11-month positions over to 12-month. We had the transportation routing position that we had to eliminate. We've had a lot of discussion on that position over the last couple of years. We reduced the elementary ABLE program, or eliminated the elementary ABLE program, which saved 5 teaching positions. We reduced 3 special education teachers. We had to take the 35 reading apprentices, a program that we all really love and is near and dear, and our students are seeing great gains with those high school reading apprentices. That's now funded through a grant from MSDE, but initially was planned to be in our general fund. We made changes to our pre-K staffing model based on the fact that we lost pre-K funding during the General Assembly session. We reduced or eliminated the inflationary increases we had for operational supplies, so we're trying to do the same with a little bit less, albeit with higher costs. And as you know, at the end of the budget process, we reduced the board's contribution to the other post-employment benefits fund to support staff raises here at the end of the year. So we look at the 4 specific areas. Your number 1 priority was salary, compensation, staff retention. Ultimately, $8.86 million was spent in this area. You can see roughly how that was spent between a pension increase that was required by the state, a health insurance premium increase needed to fund your self-insurance fund, and you can see how we did with salary, the salary resource pool, 3% COLA to teachers, a step and a 0.5% COLA for administrators, which is yearly the same as the 3% COLA for teachers. It's the same amount because the step is 2.5%. And we were able to support a 4% increase for our educational support employees, our hourly staff, so that you were able to do on a percentage basis a little bit more for the hourly staff than teachers and administrators. In the area of safety, security, and mental health supports, you can see we added, this is an area where we added new staff members. We added 4.5 new teachers, 12.5 paraprofessionals, registered nurse, which is actually a position that came over from our ESSER funding, 8 speech-language pathologists, which effectively should have us out of the contract business for speech-language pathologists, which ultimately saves the board money in the long term. A half-time position for someone to be orientation and mobility specialists for our vision-impaired students. We have an increase in contract services in special ed. That's actually in the special ed area. We have an increase in non-public placements of about $400,000. Of course, the school resource officer increase. This is to keep pace with the salaries that are being offered to our SROs. And we offered money forward to a license for our visitor management system, which is still, the procurement is still pending. In terms of meeting the requirement for the blueprint, this is with the remaining, actually with the exception of one, the remaining positions are here. 35 new teachers in total. This included supplemental teachers, which had been in either ESSER or in Tutoring Grant coming over, but it also included additional multilingual teachers as well. Our CTE apprenticeship coordinator falls into this category. Our blueprint coordinator, which was also previously an ESSER-funded position, increases in the expense line for dual credit expenses to support our students receiving both college credit and high school credit at the same time. You have an increase here in the transfer to private pre-K providers. So because of an increase in the number of students attending pre-K through one of our private providers locally, that costs the board an additional $517,000. That's essentially a pass-through. We receive the money from state and local government, and that money passes through us to the private providers. You can see we have set an increase in multilingual services and materials for $88,000. Required expense to the Workforce Development Board, that's an inflationary expense, about $30,000. And we had required technology expenses under the blueprint this year for an additional $250,000 in that area. And combating inflation, really modest, $555,000. It could have been much greater. The largest increase here was $368,000 to maintain the expense level required for our bus replacement cycle of 12 years. So we think now through the lens of the strategic plan that you improved in the month of July. We've taken an opportunity to take last year's expenses and show you what that looks like through the strategic plan. As you know, you've got the 4 areas. Actually, let me go back to that last slide. You've got the 4 areas: student success, cultural safety and wellness, access and opportunity, and community engagement. And we'll look at each of those individually and now break up the new in expenses that you had in the FY25 budget and show you how that lays out. Student success really fosters all of your new teaching positions, paraprofessional positions, the blueprint coordinator, multilingual materials and services, special education contract service increases, and the technology service increase, which was to drive our systems meeting towards student success. That area, you can see, is received $4.56 million of your new expenses for FY25. Looking at the area of access and opportunity, this again, bringing services, bringing opportunities to our students. So this is where we see our speech language pathologists, the O&M specialist, non-public placements for special education students, dual credit fees, pre-K fees, workforce development board, which is, if we think about what we're doing with the workforce development board, that's bringing our career, college and career coaches to students from middle school and high school. So they're bringing a different level of education and awareness to all of our students in secondary schools, raising their awareness and showing them what opportunities are available. And then, of course, additional funding for new buses falls in this category as it's really an access type of fee. Cultural safety and wellness is the largest funding area. This is the area that includes staff compensation and retention, employee benefits. So that is an area you see at $5.43 million. So all of the items related to that area show up here. As well, we had a new paraprofessional that was really targeted towards safety, culture and safety. It was a position about behaviors and improving behaviors. You also see the registered nurse in this area. You see the school resource officer in this area, as well as a handful of other fees. The least of which, and this is one we wanted to have a brief discussion on, our CTE apprenticeship coordinator falls in that area of community engagement. This is an area you probably won't see a lot of expense, but this is the area that reflects the work. All of the expenses you'll see in the other 3 culminate in this one, where we're working with our families, working with our community to build partnerships, build relationships. We probably won't spend a lot of money that looks like community engagements, but it is the work that we do that's done in all the other areas, the staff that you have in all the other areas that are going to continue the work in this area. But in this particular one, the apprenticeship coordinator does definitely fall in this area. Again, thinking about, and now moving ahead and thinking about FY26, staff's recommendation here in terms of how we might align the priorities and effectively eliminate the priorities that we used to think of and adopt from a budget perspective, also the strategic plan's priorities. Staff is recommending because of the fact that really twofold. One, because your staff retention and benefits, because that it will be a large area of expense, that seems like your number one priority. But I would also share, if we think back to the strategic planning process, when we had our community meeting at South Hagerstown High School, there was collective agreement from the nearly 100 people in the room there that night as they worked in small groups that culture, safety, and wellness has to be right before students are ready to have student success and to achieve learning. And so that area will likely be your number one priority. That's at least what staff is recommending. Student success, then, of course, being the secondary priority. And again, a lot of the expenses we have related to blueprint implementation will fall into student success. Access and opportunity will likely be your third. When we think about continued expenses with pre-K and dual credit, those will be areas that will definitely increase. What we might do with transportation, those areas will affect access and opportunity. And as we already mentioned, community engagement from a funding perspective will likely fall as your fourth priority. But again, the work will continually be done by all of the other areas that you're funding related to the strategic plan. And Dr. Svine, I can turn that back to you, and I think staff's available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. Once again, the purpose of this work session is to provide the board with an opportunity to have discussion on its FY26 priorities. So I'll yield the floor back to the president this time.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions?
Can I just ask one quick question? Could you remind us what the reduction in our OPEB contribution was?
Approximately
Yes,
4.8 million.
4.84.
What were we were usually doing 6, I think, right?
Yes.
1 million from the general fund, excuse me, 5 million from the general fund was our normal contribution, and 1 million from the self-insurance fund, which still exists.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments?
President Williams, if I may.
Certainly.
Mr. Prue referenced this in his presentation, and as the board engages in discussion, I'm seeking feedback and direction as we begin our process for drafting the FY26 budget. I just want to draw attention to, I believe it was this slide in regards to items eliminated, $7 million. There was one bullet regarding the 35 reading apprentices. Keep in mind that is a new program. We're 2 years in. The board has received through work session and business meetings reports regarding the significant gaps that have been closed with our striving readers and the success of that program. Also, the secondary component of the reading apprenticeship program, it has the potential to grow our own. Keep in mind the price tag. I believe you see that before you, and that while it was grant funded the first 2 years, we're fortunate that for this year only, the state MSDE is funding this. This is right around $300,000. But as we continue through FY25 and transition to FY26, to continue this, this is a fund. These funds would need to be in the general fund. So I just offer that to you for clarification as we talk through that and plan the FY26 budget proposal. But I am seeking kind of feedback from the board regarding that initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Samai.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Svine, how many did we originally plan to have? Wasn't it like 72 and we had to cut it in half?
For 2 years, we've had right at 30, right around 35 or so. This past year, I believe what you recall, we had 70 some that applied, that had interest. So it's growing. Yes, Mr. Guestford, you're absolutely right. There's a level of interest from our students, but our staff had to cut it down to, I believe, 30 some participants to meet the funding that's available.
Because I would be one to support more of that, because if we have that many people applying and we need that to help cover that gap, that would be something that I would like to see, a number increased. I mean, $300,000, I mean, we'd have to cover that in the general budget, but, adding another, 10, 20 students, $500,000, I think in the long run benefits the school system and the community.
I appreciate that feedback, and I do agree in terms of the significant results in terms of improving student reading and closing reading gaps for our youngest learners, quite significant 2 years in a row. It's also encouraging to see that we have 11th graders and 12th graders that want to go through that training, provide that support, direct support to our students in the classrooms, and we also hope that that will also grow some of our future teachers or perhaps additional pairs in that area.
Do we have any other programs for math programs along with reading, and then something new, an incentive to maybe look into that program of maybe doing something for math?
We do not have an apprenticeship program in place for math, but certainly that's something that our curriculum instruction team could look at based on the success of the Reading Tutors program.
I would like to see, I don't know about the rest of the board, but I'd be interested in seeing the benefits, of a math program along with that, and maybe just starting that out small just to see what, we can continue to build on that apprentice program since we've had it for 2 years now.
President Williams. I have a question. Dr. Sylvine, does working with a reading tutor help improve attendance? Because I know some of our struggling readers, not all, but some of our struggling readers are struggling because they have poor attendance. And I was just wondering if working with a tutor makes them want to come to school more and maybe push mom and dad to get them there.
So to understand, the question is, those students that are receiving support from reading tutors, have we seen improved attendance? While I can say we've seen improvement in their reading skills, I will ask Dr. Willow to come forward. I'm not certain regarding attendance. Kind of anecdotally, I believe when students are developing skills, there tends to be a desire to be there on a more regular basis.
It makes it a little tougher to track that, and there's a couple of reasons. If you remember back from the CNI presentation and the board presentation, some students might be with a reading tutor all year, and others might only be with a reading tutor for a couple of weeks. So what we'd have to do is look at that data to probably create some type of baseline that says they were with a reading tutor for a half of a year or something like that to see that impact, because the goal is to have the student no longer work with the reading tutor. And so it's not as easy to track attendance as we do with beginning, middle, and end of the year assessments. That data is much cleaner, but I think it's something we could look at and see if there's any data that we possibly could correlate.
And to add to Dr. Willow's comments, kind of going back to the strategic plan, when you look at the strategic plan and the priorities, and when you look into the embedded target areas and strategies, attendance, monitoring attendance is a priority of the strategic plan. So I believe we're going to have more robust attendance data. In particular, we know right now we have some schools that are serving as exemplars in terms of beating the odds, students that have had chronic attendance challenges, and they're implementing strategies that are getting the students in the seats. We see that as you kind of reflect on the reports through curriculum and instruction, we see that when our students are in the seats working with our teachers, they perform well. When they're not regularly in attendance, we see a significant drop-off, and that's why that is a primary focus in our strategic plan.
Thank you.
Is it 25 or 35 reading apprenticeships that we have through the grant?
It's 35.
It is 35.
The print copy went home, had an error on Friday, so it is 35.
Okay. Okay. And then the question I have, and I just, as we were talking about student success through the strategic plan, I was thinking maybe we should have done Gary's presentation first and then talked about the budget, because when I was looking at it, it looked like we had some pretty significant shortfalls in secondary math. And if I remember, I think I was reminded the other day that we did recently, within the past year or two, invest in a math program at the elementary level. And I'm wondering if there's something out there that we've had our eye on or been testing or looking at or anything like that.
I could answer that now, but we're actually going to also talk about that in the next presentation.
That's fine.
Okay, so what I heard is that Dr. Savine is looking for feedback with regard to including the apprenticeship program into the 2026 budget. Do we have consensus that that's something that we want to do?
Yes.
Yes? Yes, okay, so that's a given. And Mike, I heard what you said about math, and I think this, Daryl, to your point, this discussion is the first of many, this work session that we'll have. So after we hear Dr. Willer's presentation, with Mike's suggestion of doing something more, whatever that might be in terms of boosting math scores, you know, that's something that we can certainly.
We're not worried about the test, we're worried about the capability.
Yeah, so we need to put a pin in that and, you know, hold on to that thought. I would just like to say that I appreciate what staff has done to have us be able to look through the strategic plan lens at this. And what I'm hearing from teachers and administrators is that they would like to keep the focus on culture, improving the culture of our schools. So I would like to see us, you know, put considerable amounts of money into that still. And, you know, quite frankly, I'm fine with what we see here as priorities. I'm wondering how students were impacted by the cuts we made with regard to the 6 pre-K teachers, the 6 pre-K tutors, the 3 special education teachers. You know, are those positions that we should be thinking about putting back in the 26 budget because they have impacted students negatively? Or is this a matter of, well, we got along okay and let's see how we get through this next school year? Thoughts on that?
So I'll take the pre-K question and we'll start there. None of our students were directly impacted due to the cuts in pre-K. If you remember, board members, and for our public that's listening, originally the state was going to provide funding for Tier 2 students. And pre-K is one where it's actually, the staffing ratios are all spelled out in law. 10-to-1 for a teacher, and when we go over 10 pre-K students, we add a paraprofessional. Pre-K is also its own bucket, if you will, within Blueprint, and 75% of the money following students with pre-K, and with the additional Tier 2 funds coming in, we had proposed adding those as new positions because of the increase in pre-K spending. When, I think it was the final week of the General Assembly, Tier 2 funding was put off a year. And because of that, we then pulled those positions back out of the budget because we were not receiving the funding that we thought we were going to get for pre-K. So I don't see pre-K being impacted because those positions hadn't been in our budget, hadn't actually made it to a classroom. Now, as we look at the future with Tier 2 funding, it'll really depend on what Annapolis does this upcoming session. And if funding increases, there's obviously a need to potentially increase pre-K as well.
Thank you.
I also, President Williams, if I may, just add to Dr. Willow's comments, not regarding pre-K, but the 12-month staff members that we had mentioned early in the process. And you see we have 44 staff members, And these are positions, registrar positions, and also in all of our schools, but in particular, our rural schools seem to have a need. I know this board just recently took action to provide some additional support at Hancock. I know in my visits last week, the staff in the front office was very appreciative, and community members have commented and appreciate that level of support. I also know that we have one school in Cascade that during the month of July, we do not have even the principal in that setting, because the principal is an 11-month position. So I just want to lift this up for discussion with the board, because I believe these 12-month positions, a number of them are support positions. Some of them are administrative as well, and you also see the one transportation router. We have one transportation router for over 22,000 students. That router is exceptional, but we have one. So I want to lift up those positions, and I appreciate the conversation regarding with the reading tutor apprenticeship. The board's provided clear direction there, but I think this is perhaps another item that there would be value in the board discussing to provide better understanding and direction for the superintendent and staff. Mr. Prue, is there anything that you'd like to highlight for the benefit of the board in those areas?
No, I think, if it's helpful to put some numbers to it, that area of adding 12-month staff is a cost to the general fund of just under $400,000, just $393,000. The router is about $75,000. And I couldn't concur more. I think if there's, for me, and of course, operations is what I oversee, so maybe I'm a little jaded. That is an absolute need that we have to fix. The individual that does that work gives us relentless hours, and honestly, I think we're paying overtime for the work that has to be done. I think a lot of what we're when we think about a router with benefits at $75,000, we're going to recoup a portion of that just out of overtime and greater improvements. I'll give you an example. So, especially as we head into the first week of school. So there's a lot of IEP meetings that happen during the first week of school as teachers and staff come back. They're meeting with families, talking about individual students' needs. Every special ed student that needs to be routed for special ed transportation is touched manually by the router to ensure that they're getting the shortest route, they're on the right bus, we're getting them to the right location. Additionally to that, we hand touch every pre-K student to make sure that we don't lose a 4-year-old or don't get them assigned on the wrong bus because the software goes screwy or what have you. And that all takes time. And so we have deadlines, whereas if you're assigned to pre-K and you want to be sure that you've got your child routed to be able to get on the bus the first day of school, that form is due into the transportation office by July 29th. Invariably, others come late. It happens. It's, we see it everywhere. Paperwork is, not always on time, or families apply for pre-K late, or it takes them a while to get their documentation together, to get their packet together. Because we need the time to route those 1,000 individual students, we can't always guarantee every student transportation the first day. So then there'll be, once the routes are published, any student that gets routed after that, they have to wait for transportation. Usually, actually, a whole grouping of them got transportation today, so they missed the first couple of days of bus transportation. Those are the access and opportunity things that I think we can address with that kind of a position to make sure all of our students are getting on the right bus on the first day and able to access education right at the beginning with all of their peers. So I probably said too much about that position, but it's near and dear to my heart.
My question was going to be, could you put some numbers to those things? And by my calculations, it's like $468,000 for those two things, which is, what, $500,000?
Yep. So
colleagues' thoughts with regard to including those in the 2026 draft budget?
I'm not opposed to the 12-month transition to 12-month, I would rather entertain the elementary positions. I realize we only had how many, 1 or 2 students in first and second grade last year, or whenever it was, the last year was. But some of those higher grade levels, I believe, had some more students that potentially created larger class sizes. So I think if we want to really increase the access for the students and in turn, in my opinion, go and spur some more success, I would prefer looking at making some of those class sizes a little smaller first and then look at that. To me, it would be more important to make sure we have more teachers in front of the kids and then go back and look. Because I'd also be curious, what do these 44 staff members that currently hold those positions have to say about it as well? You know, is this something they asked for, or is this something that we brought up? You know, I'd be curious to hear that as well.
Mrs. Murray?
I'm a little confused, and clarify that for me. You want to hire more teachers to make class sizes smaller, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, do we have room in buildings for more classes? That's what I'm thinking. I know most of our buildings are pretty tight as far as classrooms. Would we have to get more portables? Would we, you know, that's something we'd have to look at, space. How would we make more classrooms? Yeah.
That's not under my realm, that's staff to.
No, I know,
let us
I'm just saying, I'm just throwing that out there. I'm thinking along your lines of what you're thinking about, adding more teachers to make more classrooms. So I'm just thinking about space where we put them and things like that.
And yeah, that's why I was saying I would rather entertain that before we entertain the transition to 12-month, because if we brought those 5 teaching positions back, I would imagine the cost difference between adding that 1 month for the 44 employees and bringing back those 5 teaching positions, I'd imagine the cost differential on that probably wouldn't be too far apart.
Perhaps
Is that
President Williams, to the discussion of board members, you know, kind of looking at this FY25 budget, you know, we once had contingency positions that are not in this current budget that would help us address any hot spots in terms of pupil-teacher ratios. I think it may be beneficial for the board to see our class sizes from the curriculum instruction team and leadership team, because as we look at our pupil-teacher ratios here and in comparison to other localities, our pupil-teacher ratios are pretty low. There are some spots that, in particular, some of our one-round rural schools, if we had contingency positions built in, it would help us in particular at the elementary level. I would recommend for the board to consider putting at least 6, perhaps a little more, contingency positions K through 12. Most of them will probably be allocated for elementary, but sometimes there are some challenges at the high school level. But more often than not, it's in our rural 1-2 round schools that we see pockets that we need flexibility to assist. We also going back to the 12-month position. There was a question in terms of have we had conversations with those employees that are currently 11-month. Before we went into the budget proposals, our leadership team members did have conversations with principals and asked principals to gauge the level of interest there and willingness. I believe nearly all, I think there may have been 1 or 2 that their preference was to remain 11-month. In those cases, we would likely consider grandfathering and then looking to transition later on. But that was a part of the discussion. But it goes back to being able to provide services to our students and their families throughout the course of the year. And also, when these staff members are working year-round, it allows us to be better prepared as students are transitioning in, and it lessens the burden at the start of the school year when many of our support employees are just returning, and then they have a buildup of the summer months in terms of students coming in and levels of support that need to occur. It just allows us to be more efficient as you consider the price tag of 44 positions plus the router, just south of $500,000. You see the value there. But I do think we, to Mr. Evans' point, while our pupil-teacher ratios are pretty low in most cases, we do need contingency positions in the budget to be able to support some needs where the pupil-teacher ratios are different than the averages. Dr. Willow, would you like to add to that? I know.
No, I think I put my school principal hat on, and I think it's hard to always predict enrollment trends, especially to your point at smaller schools where 2 rounds and we have 5 new enrollments and now class sizes are higher than what we would like. So contingency teachers at the elementary or even the secondary are always something that historically, whether I've been a principal or in this role, I've seen used. Again, responding to the needs of whatever is happening within our community, whether that be new development or just, again, 1 round at 1 elementary school can throw off the entire schedule for the rest of that elementary school. So those positions have been used in the past.
So colleagues, what I'm hearing then, the superintendent is recommending that we build into the draft budget 6 contingency positions to be wherever the need is. What are your thoughts? Is that something we want to include
We've always
in
had
the draft?
contingencies added into the budget. I think ever since I've been on the board, we've used that as a buffer. And I think maybe last year might have been the first time that we pulled them all back. It seems like we've always had. So, I mean, I think that's not unusual to have that. So we should have contingency. It does give you a buffer on that, but.
So you're a yes.
Yes, I'm a yes on that.
Peter's shaking his head.
Yeah, I'm a yes.
Yes.
I was just going to add.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No,
Yes,
go ahead. You.
Go ahead.
About the contingency teachers. I do like the idea of an overall goal being looking at lowering class sizes where needed, and so I'm glad to see we'll continue discussion on that. And I'm also fine with the 12-month employee. I think if we can do it, we heard about the benefits last year. And then, is it okay if did you get what you needed on that last question? Can I ask another question?
Well, can we go,
Yes.
Linda, does yours relate to contingency
No.
teachers? No? So do you want to bring up a new topic, or does this have to do with the
Just ask a
40?
couple
With the okay, so we're all good. We have consensus that we want to have the 6 contingency teachers in the draft budget, yes?
Yes.
Where are we now with the 44? I heard Daryl, he made his points regarding the 44 staff members being transitioned to 12-month, and the transportation router. Where do the rest of us, what do we think?
I definitely want to see the transportation router. It's very important that special ed children get on the right bus at the shortest possible time. It's very important for kids to get picked up at the right bus stop. It's a very daunting job. And for us not to put that in there, I think would be a disservice to the students of Washington County and to this one person that has this tremendous responsibility. So I'm for putting it in.
So you're for just the router or for?
No, I'm for it all.
For
but
it all? Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Zentmeyer, I can tell you want to speak, because,
If
go
you
ahead.
look at the list, there's not anything that isn't important. Inflationary increase, obviously we have to pay operational supplies. We decided back when we reduced the OPED contribution that it wouldn't continue for another year, and everything else on the list is important. So prioritizing, you say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We need it all.
Well, that's what we're talking about. Do we in fact need it all? And thank you.
I just want to say this. I have a great-granddaughter, goes to Ramps, and unfortunately, her mother and father did not get the paperwork in, so right now she's not assigned to a bus. Her brother, who's in kindergarten, is assigned to a bus, and so forth. So we take her to school. My wife and I take her to school and pick her up, and I assume it's this way every place, but the staff at Ramps do an amazing job getting those kids out there, making sure that they're with the right parents, checking, I guess, I don't know, identification, but what I want to say, authority to be able to pick those kids up and everything. And the staff is just so nice. I mean, they hug those kids and everything. They bring them out holding their hands and stuff. It's just amazing what they do. I'm very impressed with what I see at Ramps.
Thank you, Mr.
I just think the router might help a little bit. I mean, that's a lot of work for one person to do the county.
So before we get back to Mr. Bickford and the comments that he wants to make, where are we with the router and the 44? Do we have consensus that we want to include
I'd just like
those?
to add one more thing, that when we go and look at all these other things, the reason why I asked to consider the other things first is because we're already spending next year's money this year when we look at not funding the OPEB, and if I remember correctly, we also took some money out of the salary resource pool to fund our pay increases this year. And so I agree with Dr. Zentmeyer that all these things are important, but the 44 staff members transitioning to 12-month, quite frankly, it sounds very reasonable, and I'm not against it, but when we go and look at it, the fact that we're taking money from we're spending next year's money this year, right? And when we look at it, this is the one thing that we've had it this way ever since our school system was in existence. Why couldn't it wait one more year, in other words? And so if we had the money to do it, I'm for it, but I think that's something that we can wait another year if need be.
I'm confused. You said we took money out of the salary pool
I
for
know we
increases?
took money-
The salary pool was for increases.
Well, I think there was something in there, I can't remember how that discussion went. Do you remember? There's something else on top of the reducing the OPEB contribution that we took money out of to fund our pay increases this year.
So the salary resource pool was initially in the superintendent's draft. It was 5% for all units. So yes, we did take, because we didn't have funding, we did reduce the resource pool by 2% for teachers, 2% for administrators, and 1% for ESP to balance the budget. Instead of it being 5, it ended up being 3 and 4 for the respective parties.
So we didn't take money anywhere, we just
We
didn't give
didn't
them.
fund it at the same rate that it came in,
Yeah,
right?
we didn't give them the raise that we hoped we'd be able to give them. So where are we then? Do we have consensus that we want to include the 44 and the transportation router? You're putting your hand up for that, Linda?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Peter, yes?
Yeah.
Mike,
I had just a question about that.
go ahead.
On the 44, is that 44 people in schools that don't have a 12-month person? Is there any school that doesn't have a 12-month person? Is that what you're saying, that all 44 of those would bring every school up to that one person in a school?
I'm going to ask Dr. Webster to come forward. We have consistently, there are positions in most of our schools that have traditionally been 11-month that we identified we could benefit. There's a work level and demand that justifies a 12-month position.
Yeah, so these are specifically our elementary and middle school assistant principals that are 11 months, so are unavailable to support engagement in professional development, supporting planning for the opening of the new school year, working alongside their administrative teams in the month of July. We had a little Mr. Stauffer just brought up ramps. We added 2 12-month APs to ramps this past summer, and their opening was so smooth. The time that the administrative team was able to work together to plan logistics for the opening of school with all those pre-K students coming in at the same time. So we see the benefits of having our administrative teams work throughout what is really a very short summer to transition to a new school year. It also includes registrars, 12-month registrars for our middle schools. We have families that are looking to enroll. We have families that move schools throughout the summer, and the backlog when our registrars come back to register families does cause a burden and slows down our ability to serve families. It includes our high-volume elementary schools that have only one 12-month employee in the summer. They need an additional support. So we've strategically identified those assistant principals, those 12-month registrars in our middle schools, and our high-volume elementary schools that need a second 12-month employee to really be able to serve. And we heard the question about where this came from. It was loud feedback from our administrators and our clerical staff who are not working in the summer, who need to work because of the volume of work.
But you said that the price tag was $400,000.
For the whole thing.
And just for the benefit for the board, and thank you, Dr. Webster, part of the budget process involves our team members meeting with administrators, and administrators, school-level administrators work with their team members, and they bring forward their greatest need areas. So that's why this item that we're discussing, that was one of the most significant needs identified by our school-level leaders last year.
Okay, so back to where we were, do we have consensus that we want to put those positions into the draft budget? I see a shaking of head.
Put them in and see where it goes.
4, Dr. Zappmeyer?
Yep.
Yes, Mike?
Put them in and see where
I'm
it
only
goes.
for the router, not for the 12-month.
Okay, so we have 5 that are in favor, so what I'm hearing that we have decided so far is that we're going to put the reading apprenticeship program into the draft budget and the 6 contingency teachers.
I'm sorry, maybe I missed that. Are we not getting the grant again for the apprenticeship students? Oh, okay.
So that ceased this current year. Fortunately, we received support from MSDE for this year only. We will no longer have funding for that after this budget cycle.
So Peter, you had a new topic.
Well, let me build on one of them. Part of the apprenticeship would also be looking at expanding it and also possibly doing math tutors. Is that an idea at this point?
That
Okay.
was part of the discussion. Certainly seek perspective of the full board, looking at the results of the reading tutors, and Mr. Guestford has observed this firsthand from curriculum instruction standpoint, as well as other committee members. I think it's worth our team looking at and bringing some recommendations forward, but there's no disputing the student achievement improvements and results of the student or the reading tutor apprenticeship program.
Do we want to have numbers brought back to us with regard to math tutors for consideration for a future work
I think it
session?
sounds like we're for the reading,
And
right?
for
We're-
expanding,
Yeah.
what would make sense in terms of expanding the reading apprenticeship program?
Yeah.
We can bring
President
numbers back
Williams,
next
yeah,
time.
just for the benefit of the full board and what Mr. Guestford is referencing is he recalls very vividly Mrs. Pumphrey referencing this year that we had over 70 students that were ready and willing to come through and to go through the training and serve as apprentices. So I anticipate that we could expand that, but there would be a doubling of funds. Right now, the funding is right around $300,000, a little bit more. So that would go to $600,000. We would need to investigate and look at the math tutors. Certainly, one would think that looking at need as well as the popularity of the reading tutors, that's something that our curriculum instruction team could explore as well. When we look at doing so, do the quick math, that just one program quickly could go to nearly $1 million. But this is helpful for the superintendent team as we plan for this upcoming budget season and certainly the draft. Dr. Willow, is there anything that you would like to add for the benefit of our board members regarding conversation pertaining to math apprenticeship tutors?
Well, I think I would start by just saying thank you for your support. The reading tutors have made an impact, as we've presented before. We do have, I would also remind that within our paraprofessional ranks, we do have math and literacy tutors as part of the TSI fund. Now, TSI dollars, transitional supplemental instruction, is what that stands for. It is a grant. As part of Blueprint, though, they are set to expire here in FY26. So I would probably want to come back with some recommendations and some different cost models if that's something that interests the board to look at, because there's certainly some value to the grant positions we already have as well.
Are those services provided during the traditional school day, or are they
Yes.
outside as well?
During the traditional school day.
Peter, did we get you all?
I think I'm good.
You're good?
Yep.
I wanted to bring up one more thing, and this falls under culture and safety and wellness. With regard to our school resource officers, Dr. Sabine, we have schools that are sharing resource officers. What are your thoughts? Do we need to look to increasing the number of SRO officers so that we have better coverage at certain places, or are we fine as we are? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, President Williams. I think the answer would be the more we can increase but have confidence that we have a workforce there, that would be preferred. But recognizing from a law enforcement standpoint, they have some challenges with expanding the workforce. I think probably perhaps a more viable solution would be acting on what this board has already done in terms of implementing school security assistance in our city middle schools and high schools. I know while that's in place now, we're seeing very positive results, preferred results in terms of changing and enhancing overall culture. I believe when that was first proposed, the desire would be to expand to all of our secondary schools, including city and county. That would be a preferred approach, and I believe is right in line with our strategic plan and in terms of safety and security. We've been able to attract a very skilled and talented workforce in terms of security assistance. I think that would be probably the most viable option, and certainly would be a preference of this superintendent and our team, because and recognizing that this board has always been strongly committed and focused on safety and security, and that's why we have safety and security assistance in our city middle and high schools. But there's a need to expand, and that allows us to also enhance some other safety features in all of our schools with consistency. But I'm looking at Mr. Prue, and I know he and I have had multiple conversations regarding this, along with Mr. Ganley, and we are very much in support of expanding security assistance in all of our secondary schools. Mr. Prue?
Thank you, Dr. Spine. And I think board members, if I had my way, I'd want both. right? I'd want the increase in the school security officers, and I'd want the increase in the school safety and security assistants. I think we are in a better position to increase our school safety and security assistants than we will be to increase school resource officers. And I'll give you sort of a matter of fact lay of the land of where we are right now with our SROs. And this is not a knock on either department. I know, there's a lot of conversation going on in the community right now about our policing agencies and safety and so forth. We are currently, and with the increase that the board authorized for the current fiscal year, we are funded to pay for 6 school resource officers in the city, plus a unit sergeant, and 4 resource officers in the county, plus a unit sergeant. We are currently staffed through the county sheriff's office with the 4 SROs and the sergeant. We're currently down 2 resource officers in the city, and we have 1 on a medical leave. And truthfully, the city does not have the workforce to backfill those positions. The remaining officers are needed on patrol, and I get that. And we work closely with Chief Kiefer, and we provide the coverage as necessary. We float coverage, we move coverage based on what's going on in the community. We've been successful in filling our safety and security assistant positions. We have currently, off the top of my head, I want to say that currently the number is 19 SSAs between North, South, and Williamsport high schools, as well as Springfield Middle School, E. Russell Hicks, Northern Middle School, and Western Heights. They also provide additional coverage for evening events. If you're out at baseball, basketball, softball games, track and field, you name it, you'll see the safety security officers out at all those events. And we have a desire to grow those into our county schools. And I can think of an opportunity last year where I think due to weather conditions, we had a key county event that got moved to, let's say, to Callis Stadium to play because of the AstroTurf there, the field turf. And based on the weather conditions, they moved to North, and we provided our SSAs from North for that event. And the response from, I think, the community members that were there, the administration, they're like, this is amazing. I want this. I want to have this in my school. I want to feel like I've got an extra set of eyes and not just an administrator or 2 that's walking around, but we actually have folks that's their job, walking around, watching gate, watching students, watching community members that may be acting in a different way. And so we have a desire to do that. I think we also have a desire to, as crazy it may sound, start building out an elementary program, especially some of our elementary schools in the city. Where sometimes we run into maybe perhaps more custody issues or other issues, or areas where there may be more community incidents, not necessarily something happening on the school grounds, but a community incident. We want to provide SSAs to those locations as well. So that's a program that has taken off. The training has been fantastic for the staff members. We're getting a good pool of applicants, and it's a program we should continue to invest in.
So colleagues, would there be interest in having the superintendent and his staff put together a plan for expansion and coming back to us with numbers, costs associated with that expansion? And my thought is not just for this year, but, something for this year, something for the next year,
And President Williams, I appreciate you mentioning the importance of this initiative, and it may be beneficial for the board to kind of get a dollar figure on if we were to expand, and that was certainly from inception the desire to have at least safety and security assistance in all of our secondary schools. And you just heard Mr. Prue reference with the concept of identifying perhaps some targeted elementary schools for expansion. But Mr. Prue, I believe you have the figures for an expansion, or at least a ballpark figure at the secondary level. If we had safety and security assistance appropriate based on the size of the school, what would be a ballpark figure for additional dollars needed that may help board members in terms of conceptualizing this?
Yeah, I'm looking at Mr. Sisler as well. I think it would be, if we think just about growth at secondary school, it'd probably be slightly less than what our initial expansion was, which as I mentioned, was, 19 officers, 19 agents, assistants, roughly off the top of my head, I want to say it was approximately 1.5, 1.6 million. So you're probably in the 1 to 1.2 million. I see Eric's running the math.
And Jeff, by secondary schools, you're talking all high and all middle schools.
Correct, yes.
And Mr. Shives is feeding me approximately $60,000 per safety security assistant. So, if we had 15, we'd be roughly $900,000.
Mrs. Williams, my only fear would be that we don't substitute the SSAs for the SROs. I don't want to see us lose those SORs, because we're adding a bunch of SSAs to our ranks. I think they're totally different character, and I think they're both needed. And I think we need to make sure that we're holding the appropriate entities accountable for making sure that they're hiring that, and hopefully that they'll continue to work towards that goal. If we start letting up on that, saying we've got SSAs available, that's probably not something that I'd want to hear. If I was the chief, I'd say, okay, good, then you got coverage. I don't need to cover. I don't want that, because I think they're totally different things, and I wouldn't support, losing those.
I agree. I think we need to maintain what we have currently with our SROs
And staff agrees.
President Williams, if I may, and I'm in full agreement. Certainly, as you heard from my comments and Mr. Prue, and certainly we are in agreement with Mr. Gesford, we would like to see a fully staffed school resource officer team members. We are short some. That is the Board of Ed's budget. That's something that is on our general fund, and certainly that's what we want to see, but also recognizing what we've observed in terms of the positive difference that safety and security assistance can play in terms of shifting the culture, and the fact that with the workforce, we are able to get them in. But I want to be very clear, there are two distinctly different roles. The school resource officer is his or her role is much different than the safety and security assistants that are about to really strengthening relationships, high visibility, monitoring key areas both at the beginning of the school day, parking lots, lunch coverage, making sure that they have strong relationships so that students, if they're aware of something going on during a lunch hour during the day, those safety and security assistants are kind of a right-hand person of administrators, and they can get that information to the school principals and assistant principals so that proactive action can be taken for those matters that are really behavior-related and not law enforcement related. Certainly, law enforcement is for those areas where, from a legal standpoint, there's been a violation beyond just school violations, but the law has been broken. Mr. Prue, Mr. Gesford raises a really good issue, and I think it'll be beneficial. I know you work closely with our security team to maybe expand on the comments that have been made regarding the different roles of the resource officer and a security safety assistant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your example really is the dividing line. The school security assistant is there to help administrators. First and foremost, they're building relationships with students. I don't want to lose light of that, but they're there to help and assist in enforcing school rules and in school norms. The school resource officer stays out of that job. That's not their job. They are there to provide overall safety for the school, a quick emergency response should that be necessary, and to manage areas where there's violation of law. And they're not a disciplinarian. They're not part of the school disciplinary process. They are simply there for violation of law. They also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, they are also building relationships with our students. and hoping the goal of that really too is that our students, become accustomed to being around law enforcement in a good way, and building positive relationships with law enforcement, which makes our community a safer place to live as well.
Anyone else have anything? We had allocated 60 minutes and we've gone a little bit beyond that. Dr. Savine, do you have enough feedback in terms of what we discussed to work
President
on your
Williams?
draft budget?
Yes, I do, and I really appreciate the level of engagement, feedback from board members. I do want to seek clarity regarding the recommendation of superintendent staff regarding the board's priorities, merging what we once had for the last 2 years, as Mr. Prue has, in his presentation, identified, kind of merging those 4 priority areas: student success, certainly heard comments of the board, culture, safety, and wellness. Keep in mind that culture, that's where the salary components will be embedded in there, along with some other areas. I just want to make sure, my understanding was there was agreement with the board to move forward with those priorities, but I just wanted to make sure that was crystal clear before we move forward.
Thank you. We're looking at this, and it's the last page in our handout. Are we as a board on board with this, with these as our priorities moving forward for 2026?
I'll just add, from an alignment standpoint, as we work with our schools with school improvement plans, a district improvement plan, this level of alignment with the board adopting this as budget priorities really helps us to make sure our resources are being allocated and directly aligned with our strategic plan.
Are we good?
I'm good with the priority list that you had listed. He listed 1, 2, 3, and 4. That priority list, I'm good with that.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sisler, I don't think you had a chance to speak very much, did you?
He prefers that.
Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prue. So our next topic is college and career readiness for 2023-2024, Part 2. Dr. Savine, did you want to say a few words and introduce the presenters?
Yes, thank you, President Williams, members of the board, and thank you, President Williams, for emphasizing this is indeed Part 2 of college and career readiness. I see Dr. Willow has remained at the table, and I see Mrs. Pumphrey and Mrs. Seiler is here to continue our conversation. But I want to take just a moment to reference a couple things. It wasn't that long ago that this board heard the Part 1. And Part 1 of college and career readiness referenced a number of things. It referenced advanced placement results, international baccalaureate results, but perhaps most importantly, dual enrollment, career and technical education participation, as well as results. I referenced those last 2 areas, dual enrollment and CTE participation, and in particular, the industry recognized credentialing. Those 2 areas we are leading. We're actually at the top of the state in those areas, along with our strong and robust apprenticeship program. I want to emphasize this because all those things that I just mentioned are results and participation that occur over time. And certainly there are measurements that are more specific in a point in time. And our MCAP results are that point in time measure, but I think it's important that we recognize that there are multiple measures that are important as we track our student success, and recognizing that every aspect, whether it's ongoing or a point in time measure, all of it matters, and we need to identify areas where we're excelling and also areas where we need to improve. Dr. Willett.
Thank you, Dr. Svine. Good afternoon, members of the board. We're going to start by just getting into 2024 MCAP data. And there's a couple of things that I want to remind board members. So the MCAP scores come back with 4 different performance levels. Ideally, what we want to see is all of our students at a level 3 or higher in both math and ELA. It's important to note that we do, every student in grades 3 through 8 will take 1 English language arts assessment and 1 math assessment. In 8th grade, that gets 7th and 8th grade for math. That gets a little trickier depending on if students are taking high school level courses such as algebra or geometry. So that is also factored in to any 8th grade data that you see. A couple of things, and I say this to share that while WCPS, if you add up all of these assessments, there are 14 different areas that potentially students were assessed on, met or exceeded the state average. I think we can all acknowledge there's still work to be done here. It's not a celebration in the sense that while we're ahead on the state average, we want to see obviously the performance levels increase. And particularly I highlighted 2 areas. There is some misconception with the difference between a level 3 and a level 2. Level 3 is that the student is proficient in almost all standards, while a level 2 is what we might refer to as a partial proficiency, meaning that in some areas the students are excelling, but in other areas they may need work. And I'm going to have Ms. Seiler here later on give you an example of what that looks like when we talk in terms of math, but it really holds true the same in English language arts. In both areas for level 2, students can meet some of the standards, but in some areas they struggle then to apply them into real world scenarios. A couple of things a little different with high school. We'll review by starting with what's a cohort. A cohort is simply when a student enters 9th grade. So when we look at the 23-24 data, that was last year's freshman students. Okay, last year's freshman students or this year's current sophomores. And if you go across, the same thing, 22-23 is our current juniors or last year's sophomores. And then of course, 21-22 data is our current seniors or last year's juniors. So we take 1 English assessment and it's English 10, English Language Arts MCAP 10. And so typically that means we would have students take that assessment at the end of their 10th grade year. Now, 9th and 10th grade for ELA share similar standards. So for the first time last year, we sought permission to test honors 9th grade students at both South Hagerstown High School and Williamsport High School as a pilot. So when we look at that 9th grade data and we see that 83.3% of our students are proficient, there's asterisks there because we're talking about specifically Williamsport High School and South High students that had the opportunity to take the assessment that were in Honors English 9. Most students will not take the English assessment until the end of their 10th grade year. But because this was the first time that we had actually given the assessment, we wanted to report the results out to the board members and the public. When we go across, the probably biggest group that we want to look at would have been last year's results in that 22-23 cohort. And when we look at that, what we're seeing is that 70% of our 10th graders were proficient on the English 10 MCAP. And that's up from about 66% the year before. In almost all areas, we saw gains. Not as fast as we would have liked. The state stayed relatively flat, but if I looked at all grade levels, you would have saw some gains, and that's why overall our proficiency rates are up. And again, when we look at our seniors, or this year's seniors, last year's juniors, when we have students that are not successful, we will look to do remediation, and students have the opportunity to take the assessment again in 11th grade. I want to remind board members this is not a graduation requirement anymore. Students do not need to pass English MCAP or Algebra MCAP in order to graduate. These are assessments that they must take. So part of that is for student motivation is a factor for some of these assessments. With that being said, We're proud of our 10th graders and our juniors that have reassessed. This continues to be a strength for us when we look at this data. Similar when we look at math. Now, math is a little different in the sense that there's really one of 3 assessments that a student might have taken. So I may have taken algebra, I may have taken geometry, or I may have taken algebra 2. Again, if you go back to our last program of studies presentation, the goal is to pass one assessment. It doesn't matter in terms of for college and career readiness, whether that happened in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, it is the goal to have passed one assessment. Obviously, for our algebra, and when we look at our math percentage at cohort, those numbers are much smaller. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides. Last year, when we looked at, there was a couple of things that make this slide important. Last year, MSDE, under the requirements of the blueprint, had an outside group analyze math achievement data. And so they looked at MCAP data for both English language arts and math. And what they found that when they followed students onto college, when they looked at college success and they backwards mapped students basically looking at their high school results, the number one indicator of success was actually the GPA. The second indicator of success was the English 10 MCAP. And then further down was SAT, PSAT, and then the Algebra 1 assessment. So the state added a component to define college and career readiness around the GPA of a 3.0. So what you see here is the 2 new factors. This is the first year where GPA has also factored into this. If we look at our current juniors and our current seniors, because GPA does not count until after your sophomore year, so we'd be looking at those 2 cohorts. What you see is when we add the 3.0 GPA into this mix, it adds a component to, and you can see the updated proficiencies. There's a couple of things I want to highlight before I go back. And I want to be clear, across the state, everyone is grappling with the same results with math. I believe the highest county, and you can sort of see where we're at with our percentages, was Howard County at 40%, or it might have been 41%, right around there, pass rate. And so the question has come up multiple times as we meet, as the state provides additional information. How is it that we're seeing English MCAP results this high, but our same students are struggling with the math MCAP assessment? And this is something that's important to look at because it's really a couple of things. When we go back and we look at PARCC assessments or HSA assessments, the results have always been equal, meaning that within a couple of percentage points, students tend to be proficient in both. The MCAP assessment is newer in the terms of now it's an adaptive assessment. And with an adaptive assessment, there is a greater, they shortened it and there's less reliability, which I think is why we saw the study come out from an outside vendor that said, hey, Algebra 1 in some of these assessments may not be as accurate of a predictor as what you think. There's also a state committee that's now looking at the scoring. It's not an issue with the content. I want to be clear on that. No one's second guessing content. No one is second guessing the results in terms of we know we need to do better. But I do think from a student perspective, we want to make sure that the score that a student is earning is not negatively affecting them or impacting them because of how these assessments are scored. And again, if I remind board members, if we're talking about college and career readiness, and I don't care if we look at AP, IB, or dual credit, we have 76% of our seniors that went on and were successful in college level math and ELA, yet they're not passing the math MCAP. It's an outlier in terms of data. It doesn't mean we're making excuses, let me be clear. It doesn't mean that we don't own it. But when we do have multiple data points and there's one that is an outlier, it is worth a further investigation. So if I go forward here, there's probably one more slide that I think is also important. And if you remember this, most of the presentation is different from last year. I could have easily replicated it and showed how we were above the state in all grade levels. But we wanted to really drill this down more to that cohort model at the high school because of the impact of what we want students to be, college and career readiness, using not just MCAP, but the other data points that we shared. That's on the cusp of proficiency. So we talked about all of those students that were in that level 2. And so what this is a count that shows just the percentages of both math and ELA that on average were 1 to 3 correct answers from scoring proficient. And you might say, well, 1 to 3, what's that mean? I remind board members that this is a 4-session assessment, which means generally when we start MCAP, a student is taking MCAP for 4 days. Now granted, they might only be 50, 60-minute sessions or 90 minutes if it's ELA, but it's over 4 days. And so 1 to 3 questions is pretty close. That's not even a day of a session. So we do know that when we look, even at those 2s, that we have a number of students that are close to getting over that proficiency mark, or really only 1 to 3 questions away.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So what does that kind of cusp mean that Dr. Willow just shared? Just wanted to, does it mean the student can't read? Does it mean the student can or can't do math? So just wanted to share one example of many we could pull, but here's a 5th grade math standard. I won't read it to you there, but you can see it's pretty robust, talking about all 4 operations: add, subtract, multiply, divide, models, drawings, strategies, using properties, talking about the relationship between the operations, and then relating your strategy to a written method and explain your reasoning. Very robust standard there, right? And when we talk about then assessing that standard is where the state provides us, they determine, right, how that gets assessed and at the different performance levels, what that would look like. So here is just one example of what would be called a 1-point item on a 5th grade math MCAP assessment. This would be at a level 2, or as you relate that back to the cusp data that Dr. Willow just showed. You can see here, pretty straightforward, very procedural looking type of question. So certainly a student who can answer this question can do math, right? They have a certain level of something procedural there. And then when we look at a level 3 question, I'll pause here a moment. There's a lot on that screen. Here you see one, certainly a student's ability to read may impact this for starters. Other things that I notice about this one, there's information on this particular item that's not needed to answer the question. Other items here is, how if I weren't given those choices below, how I might choose to approach this problem could be different from the choices that I'm given. So I'm also interpreting someone else's thought process, as well as looking at the properties of the operations. Things like that are honed in here in this particular item as well. So, when we think about, I think about our WCPS portrait of a graduate, right? And a student who is able to be content literate and communicate clearly and be a critical thinker. This type of problem, or this level of problem, really does bring some of those things to life that perhaps the level 2 item as a sample didn't do, right? I'm an adult now, I can pull out my calculator and do that level 2 question, right? But being more of a critical thinker and moving in that direction, this would be an example of kind of that proficiency level 3, and give you a little bit of an idea with just one example here of what that looks like in terms of how our students are being assessed.
And Ms. Seiler, I might add to this, it's not uncommon where A, B, C, and D would not be provided. And so what you might see is in some cases where it stops, where the student has to create a statement and explain the shopper's thinking, right? And so how would you go about solving it? What would be the equation? And why would you create the equation that you did? Or perhaps you have to draw a model. And so again, just because this is a level 3 that's selected response, we know that both algebra and English 10 measure a student's ability to think through writing. And so this is a question that could have easily been where there was a written response.
As we think about possible barriers that have impact on student success, it is important to consider student attendance. And I know this was brought up earlier this morning, or this afternoon, talking about other challenges. So the chart that you see on the screen, I'll take just a second to explain it. This is the impact of chronic absenteeism on proficiency. On the left column, you'll see student percent attendance, and that's if a student, the top one is 90 to 100% of the school year they attend. Under that, 80 to 90% they attend, 70 to 80% you see going down. And then you'll notice math in the middle and English language arts to the right. The number of students who had 90 to 100% attendance was a little over 10,000. And then when you get to 80 to 90%, now we're at 2,000 for math. And this is the students who took the math and ELA assessments. This isn't all students. This is by the number of students who took the assessments. So according to the data, attendance does matter when it comes to MCAP proficiency. Students who attend 90 to 100% miss approximately 2 days or less per month across the school year. But if you're missing, if you're about 80% attendance, you're missing 4 days a month or about 1 day per week, and you are 54% less likely to be proficient on the math MCAP. If you are attending about 70% of the school year, you're missing about 6 days a month, and you're 77% less likely to be proficient on the math MCAP. 60% attendance is missing 8 days a month, and you see we do have a number of students with that level of attendance. That's approximately 2 days per week that you are missing school, and you're 89% less likely to be proficient on the math MCAP. As absences increase, the likelihood of proficiency decreases. I know we're not shocked by that, but the numbers definitely speak for this. As you can see on the table, attendance also impacts proficiency on the ELA MCAP as well. So attendance definitely has an impact. As we focus on ways to continuously improve, we want to highlight priority areas in the strategic plan that align with improved outcomes on the MCAP assessments. We just discussed the barrier of school attendance, which can impact all 4 priorities and is measured in culture, safety, and wellness. Student success, the priority of student success, asks us to consider the learning experiences offered to our students every day within their grade level core instruction. This is referred to as Tier 1 instruction. It is vital that this instruction aligns with grade level expectations and the demands of the standards, as demonstrated on the math example Amy shared. One way we build understanding of high quality instruction is by observing lessons together with school leaders in a learning lab approach. We began this approach last year in elementary and are expanding it to include middle and high school leaders this year. Our mentor teachers and lead teachers are also supporting improved teaching and learning through coaching and collaboration with educators at all levels across the county. Everyone deserves a good coach, and we are working to establish structures in each building that supports this best practice. Access and opportunities is another key priority area within the strategic plan. As we work to give every student access to grade level Tier 1 instruction, it is also important to recognize and address barriers. In WCPS, we use the multi-tier system of support known as MTSS framework to support students who are not meeting grade level expectations by providing supplemental instruction or Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. The early warning system provides data for all staff to see students who are at risk for difficulty in math and/or reading, and additional assessments allow staff to diagnose specific learning strengths and gaps. The supplemental instruction is designed to target those specific gaps, as well as to monitor progress in a timely manner and adjust as needed. We are committed to continuous improvement. Our students, our staff, and our community deserve it. As we all collaboratively focus our efforts on the priorities within the strategic plan and regularly monitor our progress, we believe our student success will improve. We are happy to discuss further questions or respond to any comments.
Mr. Stafford.
Well, when I read all these things, well, first of all, let me say this. I'm not a big fan of standardized tests, period. You know, I remember the Maryland Functional Reading Test, Math Test, Citizenship Test back in the 70s and probably into the 80s. And I remember the time when we were going to have 13 HSAs and we stopped at 4. Never did get the other 9 written or do anything with them. And then we had Park, and I don't know what all we've had and everything through the years. And so now we have MCAP, which is really just something Maryland created, so you can't compare with other school districts other than the ones within the state, because you can't go from Maryland to Florida to Virginia, whatever, New York, whoever. I forget who all used the Park test and everything and all that. And so when I saw the differences in the pass rates for ELA and then the pass rates for math, and I helped write one of the editions of the HSA in government and so forth, and I remember writing the questions and everything, but I'll get to my point. Is the math MCAP reliable and valid? It leads to me to think that maybe there's something wrong with the test. I'll ask this to Dr. Willow. What was the highest pass rate in the state for math out of the 24 school districts?
I believe that was Howard County, and it was right around either 40 or 41% was the pass rate.
Howard County only had a 41 pass rate on math, which means Montgomery and everybody else was below that? And
yes.
All the other richer
actually,
districts?
when you look at there was a map that was produced by MSD that showed every county. It's public information. You'll see that we were either above or close. You know, when we look to the west, we did very well in comparison, and even within a couple points, maybe from Frederick and Montgomery, we're all sort of right there together. There's a group that's sort of bunched all within a couple of points of each other, and that's sort of where we're at. We're in
How
that
can
group.
we be sure of the reliability and validity of this test?
So I'm going to be careful when I answer this because I don't want to sound dismissive of the results. We have to own the results and we have to look at those results and learn from what we're doing, right? But at the same time, you know, I'll go back to what I mentioned in the presentation, the study that was conducted by an outside group. I mean, it was required by the General Assembly, and what we found, or what they found, is that Algebra 1 was not the best indicator for college success, meaning that when we looked at students who had graduated from Maryland schools that went on, the GPA and the English 10 results were much more greater reliability than what we saw with math. That could be a couple of reasons. Remember, Algebra 1 is something that students may take in 8th or 9th grade, whereas your other results, your GPA, is a collection of 4 years, so it may be that that's a better indicator. But I do think there is, again, and I give Dr. Savine credit for this as well, the superintendents have been questioning, you know, to make sure that there is validity for the sake of our students with the assessment. And the new state superintendent does have a task force to specifically look at MCAP to make sure that it is an accurate indicator because, again, historically, I don't care, pick a state, pick an assessment, math and ELA tend to be similar, close within results, meaning that if you're a student that can read, you typically tend to perform well within math. And I think to your point, Mr. Stauffer, there's a question around, it's not one county, why do all 24 counties have a gap that's wide between ELA and math success? I think it's a fair question to ask. It's not something that we probably will resolve within this room, but it's hopeful that the task force will look at that a little bit more.
And I'll just add to Dr. Willow's points, and I just want to emphasize one thing. We own this, and our commitment is to improvement. However, you have to ask some questions. And to be fair, when you consider the last decade in in Maryland, what has occurred with standardized testing. There have been a lot of change, and Mr. Stauffer, I believe you alluded to this, and it's accurate. I believe there are 3 different standardized renderings. So basically, every 3 years, it's shifted. Now, you don't have to be in education very long to recognize from a state standpoint, anytime you shift an assessment, a statewide assessment, accountability assessment of this magnitude, the first year of implementation, you're going to have what? The lowest results. And then when you start looking at alignment issues and the validity of things, you see improvement over time. We haven't seen that in mathematics, and we've had significant focus. Credit our team members in math and our teachers, a level of focus. The model is very similar in terms of having a tiered systems of support when students are not performing after we've provided rigorous exposure and content. When they don't get it the first time, then we're providing those real-time supports in smaller groups and where necessary providing individual support. But we're not seeing, at least on the MCAP, the level of results that we see in other content areas. So it makes you question some things. I know Dr. Willow and I have talked, the last time we met, we referenced some AP results, and the new AP pre-calc results were in there. If you may recall, and I wrote these down, because just like with the MCAP, while we're above the state average in ELA and math, it was more pronounced with the AP. We were nearly 20% higher than the rest of the state, nearly with pre-calc 80%. We're right on the knocking at the door there. And we were also above the global rate, so international. So you just wonder about the disconnect, and I do think that the state superintendent's task force being able to drill down, looking at some longer range answers and looking at this assessment and the validity of our current assessment, there's value in that because it just doesn't make sense. And we know our team members are working really hard at this from an alignment standpoint, and also our students are, there's an impact there. Now, Dr. Willow referenced at the high school level, while it's required to take it, there's really no impact if you do not do well. Now, at other levels, potentially there's an impact, but not a tremendous amount. And so looking at adjustments, I know for us, also having a measurement that allows us to compare ourselves to not only Maryland, but other states. I know we've had discussions at the state level about the benefits of looking at NAEP. It is an international assessment that allows you to look at trends over time. That will be the work of this task force. But I want to provide Dr. Willow for the benefit of this board. Dr. Willow, can you also reference with clarity the consequences if a student does not do well? I know in some states there's a tie-in with grades and in order to be able to pass, and I know we're reworking some things, but it factors into and impacts the overall student grades.
Yeah, so for math and ELA, the assessment results, we just received them here in August. So grades are final before we get back any student achievement results. So there's very little influence that an MCAP assessment might have on a student's grade. However, at the high school level, there is college and career readiness, which is something that is will be stamped on a diploma or a transcript that indicates whether a student is college and career ready. The MCAP scores are also on the transcript, so we encourage students to do their very best on that, because those are things that you're sending off to potential college, perhaps the military, perhaps even employment status, depending on what you're doing post-secondary. So we do tell students, look, this is part of your record. We do want you to absolutely do your best. At the elementary and middle school, that doesn't exist. So it is, again, an assessment that comes back with the results in August. But again, to Dr. Savine's point, it can influence the courses that you're taking later on. So we do want to make sure, whether that's a merit level class, we do want to make sure that our students are doing their best. There is one exception. While we didn't talk about government or biology today, it might, as a reminder to board members, the biology and government MCAP assessments are 20% of the student's final grade. So it's different between ELA and math versus government and biology. I will say that based on the data that we've seen, government and biology students tend to do better, and it's less of an impact on their overall grade. That might be part of the reason why it's influenced as part of 20%.
And Dr. Willow, once again, for the benefit of the board, I know in the slide presentation, if we could go back to the slide deck where we highlight the students that we've identified, recognizing right now this is our measure for mathematics. But I think it's important, and Dr. Willow, if you can maybe expand a little bit more. I know we've got, there have been discussions just this week with the chief academic officers and superintendents across the state in terms of looking at this information, and I know there's been discussion regarding validity and items or discussion matters in that realm. But can you talk about the significance? Because we're talking about in each grade level, I'm seeing potentially one or two questions where that the results could have been enhanced by as much as 21%, I believe I see there as a high, and but statistically those are pretty significant when you target those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Take English 10, for example. I think I shared with you that, our current 11th grade cohort, 10th graders that assessed last year, were in the 70%. And you can look there and see that another 17% of students were literally 1 to 3 questions away. I mean, you're talking about close to an 88, 89% cohort there. The same with Algebra 1. Now, the key with Algebra 1 is look at the student count. Much different than what we see in the other grade levels, because again, you have multiple grade levels potentially taking Algebra 1. 600 plus students that were 1 to 3 questions away. This goes back again, I want to be clear, it's not a concern with the content, but this is only the second year that MSDE has had adaptive scoring, meaning that the questions change based on how you answered the previous question. And so there are some questions around the adaptive scoring piece that Dr. Savine mentioned, and whether or not that is actually doing the things that you want to do. There's nothing wrong with adaptive scoring, but when you shorten assessments, which again, there's nothing wrong with making assessments shorter, and you use adaptive testing, there is less reliability. And I think that's the concern, is making sure that we have this right, because I have a hard time explaining sometimes to a student or a parent, let's 750 is a passing score. And we have a whole bunch of students, a large number of students that had a 751 and a 752. And on the other side, a whole large group of students that had a 749. One is proficient and one is not. And when you're talking about that's less than a question at that point. Are we really capturing what it means to be proficient? That's all we're asking, because it does have ramifications for students. Again, when we go back and we talk about that college and career readiness measure. And I think being on year 2, I think that is a question that's still being answered, because to Dr. Savine's point, you may have changed the assessments. MCAP's been around for a couple of years, but each year the scoring has been tweaked. And I think that's the dangerous part, which makes it sometimes less reliable.
One other point that I just want to add to Dr. Willow's comments, and we've had these discussions. Dr. Willow referenced those other districts that tend to be categorized as high-performing districts like Howard and Montgomery, and our grouping in both ELA and mathematics is pretty tight. And when you dig a little bit deeper and you look at the level of resources that those districts have in comparison to us, there's a greater investment in terms of resources. Also, a point that I believe is important to make is the level of poverty and the number of free and reduced lunch students that we serve that tend to be more at risk are much greater than those districts that we're in the mix with. So once again, while there's certainly areas for improvement, I want to credit our team members and most importantly our teachers and our families that we partner with for the level of support and how we are exceeding state averages, and in many cases we're right there or above districts that are better resourced and have far less poverty challenges.
All right, maybe the math people help me with my math. It seems to me that we have 3,600 kids who have missed 4 or more days a month. So we're talking about a little bit less than a quarter of our kids that are, you look at the statistics, their proficiency decreases can be absolutely attributed to an attendance rate. So is that part of the early warning system, the attendance rate, and what are we doing about it?
So a couple things that I would probably point out with this slide. When we talk about chronic absenteeism, it's any student that's missed more than 10% of the school year. So assuming you're with us for the full school year, that's 180 days, and that's where that 18 comes from. Chronic absenteeism doesn't take into account whether a student is excused or unexcused. It's just you've missed this many days, right? So I would say a couple of things. Just because a student is in that 80 to 90, there could very well be a medical reason or parent notes that again, where a parent may believe that, hey, my student's made up the work. This is something that I talk about all the time with parents. You may have made up the classwork and you may have turned it in and earned a grade, but that doesn't mean that you've replicated the learning, the speaking, the listening, the writing, the components that come from classroom instruction every day. Making up an assignment doesn't equate to missing 6 hours of school. So we do send letters home where our principals, our PPWs are in contact with parents. We do try to, keep up with as student support team meetings with cases, as we work with counselors, as we work with the team on addressing why students aren't coming. What's the barrier that's preventing learning, or from not learning, but what's preventing the student from coming to school? And that's more on a case-by-case basis. At the high school level, as you may recall, there are good standing programs. There are other incentives for attendance. We have talked before in the past with PBIS as well. And I know our principals, assistant principals, and again, that student support team monitors attendance. A point that I would share, though, Dr. Zentmeyer, that I think we have to overcome, and there are things we can do here at the district level. Prior to the pandemic, our chronic absenteeism rate as a county was around 16%. I don't have last year's number, but I believe it's still at about 27. I would want to confirm that. So for chronic absenteeism, we have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. And I've only shared MCAP data with you today. I have no doubt that that chronic absenteeism is also impacting grades, classroom grades. Some students may not be missing or making up that work. So I think it's something that, to Dr. Savine's point, to the work that Dr. Webster and our principals, this is outlined as a top priority within our strategic plan that we have to improve student attendance. But that is something we also need to support from our parents and our community members around on knowing why it's important to come to school every day.
I can see like with English language arts, it's a little bit more organic than linear math. So the statistics become,
You're spot on. I mean, the reality is English language arts is taught in social studies, it's taught in science, it's taught in our CTE courses. Math tends to be a standalone subject. You may get it if you're in a chemistry or physics or some science courses, but you're not going to see the reading, writing, speaking, listening that occurs in English language arts. You won't see that in math class in all of the other courses, if that makes sense what I'm saying. So math does tend to be a standalone, which is why I think you see the bigger impact to attendance. But I would also argue, again, to see a 1/3 drop, even just in English language arts, even though those results are higher, that's pretty statistically significant.
so back to my question, early warning system includes attendance?
Yes. Yeah, I think I took a really long answer to get to a simple yes or no.
Dr. Willow, we had some discussion about the reliability and the validity of the tests, the math, especially the upper grades. And you mentioned early on that you felt the issue could be the scoring, and you've mentioned adaptive testing. Could you, for the people here who aren't educators, those listening and those sitting here as members of the board, could you maybe explain a little bit about what that term means in terms of the test taker, the student, how that
Certainly.
impacts?
So if I went back and I use Ms. Seiler's example she provided, maybe. If I went back to this example here, adaptive testing is a response to how the student answers this. So for example, let's say I answer this question correctly. It's going to give me a harder question. It's going to eventually level me. So it may come in and ask me to do this with multiplication or division. So if you go to that standard, as I get more questions right, the questions become harder. The same is true if I get responses wrong. It will start to level in the opposite direction. So you, President Williams, and I may be taking the same assessment, but we're not necessarily saying the same questions. The questions that each of us is answering is based on our previous result. Does that make sense? Is that better?
It's a little different than everyone having the same set of questions
Yes.
and coming up with a number right as opposed to
So as you could see, take that
level
same
of
example
difficulty.
and score then. You had the harder questions, but you may have gotten more wrong as the questions were harder. I started at a lower level, and then I worked my way back. How do our scores calculate? And I think that's some of the questions that we're asking. Not an issue with the type of question, but just to make sure that, again, in only 2 years that we have the scoring accurate. Because when you add adaptive testing, it is a very different test than, as you described, a fixed test where we all have the same questions. And how we score it becomes a much more complex model. I'm not saying it's wrong, but what we are seeing is a big difference between what's happening in ELA and what's happening in math.
Dr. Willow, just a point of clarification too. This is not a minimum competency assessment, correct? Can you expand on that comment?
So what'll happen is the questions will go up and down, again, depending on the responses. The lowest score that a student could get, and again, I don't know where the numbers come from, but is a 650. And the highest score that a student might earn is an 850. So somewhere a student is going to be placed in that 650 to 850 range based on how they answer the different questions that they see on the assessment.
But MCAP as a whole, where some states have opted for a minimum competency, Maryland was different. It's a more rigorous assessment designed to assess a higher level of understanding and comprehension of a topic, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. A couple things that I'd my takeaway on this. For transparency, could we possibly see last year's numbers for
Absolutely.
comparison? I appreciate that. We were told, with all due respect, that the state was looking at these tests last year and that they were going to do something about it. Do you know why they haven't done anything about it?
I can't speak to that. I know we've had a change in leadership. I know with the change in leadership, there's been a significant level of focus and collaboration with school leaders, superintendents, chief academic officers, and also supervisors of key content areas. So much has been done in a short period of time with the leadership change. Dr. Willow's referenced, we do have a task force. Currently, the measure, as I understand it, we're under contract, so that cannot be changed right now. So that's the commitment to making sure that we're living with the current assessment. And once that contract is up, and I think based on the work of the superintendent's, the state superintendent's task force, there will probably be recommendations moving forward. I know Dr. Willow and I both have been involved in small group meetings as well as virtual meetings in this area of focus. But it does take time, in particular when you're contracted with a certain assessment. But I know there's a high level of questioning from very educated people in terms of, is this the right, accurate measurement of what our students actually know? When you start looking at comparisons, just looking at ELA and mathematics, the same students, there seems to be some disconnect there. And then when you look at some of the other results we've referenced before, in particular with math SAT results, the AP pre-calc results, there just seem to be some different results in terms of student performance. So this is an issue there's not going to be a quick solution, but I do think that over the next couple of years, from a state standpoint, we will have either a new model or perhaps an improved model that more accurately and reliably measures our student performance. Because when you look at some of our students that are really high achievers, in particular in mathematics, you're not seeing the results or the measurements or the results that you would anticipate seeing in the area of mathematics. Dr. Willow, I know you've been working with the chief academic officers and you have a lead role there. Is there anything that you can add that may be a benefit to this board?
I think, Mr. Gesford, to answer your question, I do think the change in leadership delayed when we went to a new superintendent. To her credit, she immediately created a task force, but during that transition, I think that was the delay and why the assessment hasn't been, why we haven't found out more information, in particular with the math assessments.
So did you tell us that this was not a requirement for graduation?
It is not, let me be clear, it is not a requirement to pass for graduation. It is a requirement that a student take the English assessment in high school and one math assessment.
So it really doesn't matter if you pass or not. This here, it means nothing. As long as you sit down at a desk and you start the test, and you could fail it and still get a 650.
You could fail it with a 650 and still earn a Maryland diploma, provided you met all of the graduation requirements.
I mean, obviously, there's other things, but for this in particular.
And
So,
Mr. Gesford, to your point, and that's a very good point. In some states, in my previous state, at the high school level, there's a certain percentage of that assessment that is factored into the student's grade. And those are models that I anticipate that the task force will look at. I don't want to get ahead of the task force, but when you're a high school student and it really does not have any impact in terms of your grade or graduation, I think it increases the likelihood of some students that have greater capability and could achieve at high levels. It increases the likelihood of them sitting there and just bubbling in answers.
I think the only impact that I would go back to is what Ms. Seiler shared, and it's a good reminder. We are required to work with students who have not passed Algebra 1 and do not have that 3.0 GPA. And there are some students that would benefit from the extra math support. And so we do have math support classes during the day. In some cases, we also work with students before and after school that have not passed the Algebra 1 MCAP assessment to help them remediate so that they have that passing score.
But we don't need this test to know what students need that help.
Correct.
So why do we even do this? Is it because it's required by the state of Maryland? Because apparently everybody's failing across the state of Maryland. You continue to do this, you get the same results, and it's failing. So why isn't someone saying, we're not doing it? It doesn't matter if the kids graduate, we'll let them sit down at the desk one day and say, put your name on here, you're still going to get 650.
It's a federal requirement that
They can sit down at the
yeah,
desk.
Yes, absolutely.
And we just say, this is what it is.
The other thing that I would say that, again, from a student perspective, students that pass English and algebra that are going on to college cannot be placed in remedial classes. Now, I'm not saying if you failed at Mr. Guestford, you'd be placed in remedial classes, but I can tell you as part of the requirement of the law that if you pass the algebra and English 10 NCAP, there is no course 099 or 100. You're put into entry-level courses in the state of Maryland. So there is, again, I think that's partially why when you look at the data and you're looking at merit level classes and those that know for sure that they're looking at college, the results do tend to go up because there may be more motivation there than a student that might want to enter into the workforce where this assessment doesn't necessarily equate to college level courses, entry-level courses.
But again, you don't need to pass this one.
Or you are spot on.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to take a moment to share kind of like my experience from a student's perspective. At my school, there's a calculus club, which is basically kind of like what Mr. Evans was saying before, a peer-to-peer tutoring club where students can receive help from other students when they're struggling in math. And participating in this club last year as a tutor, it's really sobering to see how many students are struggling at a very extreme level. A lot of these students can't do simple addition, they can't do simple multiplication. So while I understand that there's this ambiguity around how the MCAP is scored, there are also students who may be in the minority who are struggling at extreme levels. So that's just what I've seen and wanted to bring that to your attention.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and it justifies why we have the math support classes during the day to be able to assist and help with that. There is no doubt, again, as we go back and we look at the data, there are definitely students that need additional math support. It's just finding, is it to what Mr. Guestford said, when you look at those results, I'm not sure it equates to 70% of our kids needing the math support. I think it's a much smaller number. And I do think, to what Dr. Savine has shared, I think there's some scoring that factors into it. But thank you, because you're spot on with your comments. There are students, just like in literacy, in math, that also require that additional support.
Yeah, I was wondering about some specific schools because, we've had a lot of discussion about behavior lately. I am disappointed that we didn't just get a chance to discuss my questions from Antietam Academy last week or today, but can we also, I know Mr. Guestford asked to see last year's numbers as well to compare. Can we also see some of the individual school data as well? And in particular, I would like to see Antietam. I know that goes probably back to their home school. But if these scores show up on their transcripts, I would imagine we can still get that data together. So I'd like to see that, because to Dr. Zentmeyer's point, I wonder if and I have a very strong opinion on this, obviously, but I wonder if the reason why our absenteeism is so high is because our behavioral problems have increased recently. And, I wonder if we took the kids who have proven they can't be successful in the traditional general ed setting and put them in a less restrictive environment, that maybe we would be able to go and see better scores across the table, even among the kids who, have shown, less than exemplary behavior.
Well, let's start with the first part of that question. So individual scores for schools are online. You can go to the Maryland report card. I'll provide this to you, but every school, so a parent, a student, a community member can go in and look at the school, see how the students at the school performed on English, math, what the chronic absenteeism rate for the school was, and then other information such as demographics, free and reduced meal percentages. So that is on the Maryland report card. All of that is available. I think, to your second point, there are lots of reasons why some students are struggling with proficiency. I go back to the work that Dr. Webster has done with climate and culture. Before learning can occur, I need to feel safe. I need to feel supported. I need to have a trusted relationship. And so I think, the work that we've done within the strategic plan that not only highlights what we need to do to improve academic outcomes, but to ensure that we have a culture where all students feel welcomed in the building is important. Discipline data certainly can have an impact on achievement. If I'm out of class, I'm obviously not learning the same rate as I'm in class. So I don't know that type of data is broken down anywhere that I've seen before, but you can get a lot of information, and we'll certainly can share it with you so you don't have to go look for it. But any parent that's listening or community member that's listening, I would want to make sure that they knew that they can see that data online.
But Antietam Academy is not on our list of schools when you go to that report card.
You are correct. The Antietam and Boyd J. Michael Technical School and last year's ABLE program, all of those programs go back to the home school. So it would be those 3 data points that we would want to filter out separately. Yep.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
All. Dr. Savine, thank you. Colleagues, thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, we'll bring the work session to a close. Thank you all.